In the heart of Silicon Valley, there is a mantra that has birthed empires: fake it till you make it. It's a philosophy of optimism, a belief that if you dream big enough, the reality will eventually catch up to the vision. But in 2003, a 19-year-old Stanford dropout took that mantra and turned it into the most sophisticated corporate deception in history. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes. She was young, brilliant, and possessed a charisma that seemed to hypnotize everyone she met. She didn't just want to build a company, she wanted to change the world. Her promise was simple, yet revolutionary: a single drop of blood. That was all she said she needed. No more massive needles, no more vials of blood, no more waiting days for results. With one tiny prick of a finger, her proprietary machine, the Edison, would run hundreds of tests, detecting everything from high cholesterol to terminal cancer. By 2014, Elizabeth Holmes was the youngest self-made female billionaire on the planet. Her company, Theranos, was valued at $9 billion. She was hailed as the female Steve Jobs. She wore the black turtlenecks. She spoke in a hauntingly deep baritone voice. She was the new face of American innovation. But behind the glass walls of the Theranos headquarters in Palo Alto, there was a dark secret. The Edison didn't work. It had never worked. And as Elizabeth was gracing the covers of magazines, the results her company was sending to real patients, fathers, mothers, and children, were nothing more than a dangerous, calculated gamble. Oh, understand the lie. We have to understand the architect. Elizabeth Holmes didn't come from nothing. She grew up in a family obsessed with legacy. Her ancestors were pioneers, doctors, and wealthy industrialists. From a young age, Elizabeth was told she was destined for greatness. When she arrived at Stanford to study chemical engineering, she wasn't interested in the slow, methodical pace of academia. She wanted the shortcut to the top.
She came to me with this idea for a patch that would sense an infection and release antibiotics. I told her, "Elizabeth, that's not how it works. It's physically impossible." She just stared at me. She didn't care about the science. She cared about the vision.
Ignoring the experts, Elizabeth dropped out at 19 and used her tuition money to start Theranos. She possessed a unique talent, not for science but for the sell. She understood that Silicon Valley investors don't just invest in products, they invest in stories. And Elizabeth had the perfect story. She claimed a lifelong fear of needles was her inspiration. She spoke about a world where no one would have to say goodbye too soon to a loved one because of a late diagnosis. It was an emotional hook that was impossible to resist. But she needed more than a story, she needed protection. She needed names that carried weight. Silicon Valley is built on disruption, but Elizabeth Holmes didn't go to the traditional venture capitalists on Sand Hill Road. She knew that seasoned tech investors might ask too many questions about the microfluidics. Instead, she went for the titans of the old guard. Look at this board. It wasn't a medical tech company, it was a shadow cabinet of the United States government. Former secretaries of state, former secretaries of defense, retired generals. These were men who had navigated the Cold War, but they couldn't navigate the manipulation of a 20-something woman in a black turtleneck. Why did they believe her? Because Elizabeth sold them something more than a machine. She sold them patriotism. She told General James Mattis that her technology could save American soldiers' lives on the battlefield by diagnosing infections in the trenches.
She is probably one of the most mature designs I've ever seen. She has a steel trap mind.
With these giants standing behind her, Elizabeth was untouchable. If a scientist questioned the math, they weren't just questioning a CEO, they were questioning the judgment of Henry Kissinger. This board of ghosts provided a veneer of institutional credibility that blinded regulators and investors alike. But while the boardrooms smelled of expensive mahogany and success, the laboratories at Theranos smelled of panic. To the public, the Edison was a miracle. To the engineers inside Theranos, it was a disaster. The physical laws of science are stubborn. When you take a tiny amount of blood and try to run 200 tests, you run into a massive problem. There isn't enough volume. The Edison would frequently overheat, the parts would fly off, and the results were wildly inconsistent. So, how did they report accurate results to patients? They cheated. Behind a locked door that few employees were allowed to enter, Theranos had a secret. They bought massive, industrial-sized blood testing machines from Siemens. They would take the tiny finger prick samples from patients, dilute them with saline solution to create more volume. A process that destroyed the accuracy of the data, and run them on the competitors' machines. Think about the gravity of this. People were getting results for cancer markers, for HIV, for pregnancy. A woman was told she was miscarrying her baby based on a Theranos test, only to find out later the baby was perfectly healthy. The lie wasn't just financial anymore. It was biological. It was a threat to human life. A lie this big requires a massive amount of silence. To keep the secret, Elizabeth Holmes had an enforcer, Sunny Balwani. Sunny was Elizabeth's secret boyfriend and the COO of Theranos. He was nearly 20 years her senior and had a reputation for volatility. Together, they turned the office into a panopticon. Every email was monitored. Every conversation was tracked. Employees were discouraged from talking to people in different departments. If you asked too many questions about why the Edison wasn't working, you were called into a room with Sunny, berated, and often fired on the spot.
It felt like a cult. You either believed Elizabeth was a goddess who would save humanity, or you were an enemy of the state.
This atmosphere of paranoia was designed to protect the deepest lie. But even the most sophisticated surveillance can't stop the truth when it starts to leak from the inside. Elizabeth thought she had curated the perfect board and the perfect staff. But she made one fatal mistake. She hired a young man named Tyler Schultz, the grandson of her most powerful board member, George Schultz. And Tyler was about to see something he couldn't unsee. Every great lie has a shelf life. For Elizabeth Holmes, that expiration date arrived in the form of a man named John Carreyrou. Carreyrou was a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter for the Wall Street Journal. He didn't care about the black turtlenecks or the shiny magazine covers. He cared about the science. When a tip arrived from a disillusioned doctor, Carreyrou began a secret investigation that would last months. Theranos didn't go down without a fight. When Elizabeth found out about the investigation, she didn't just deny it, she went to war. She hired David Boies, one of the most feared lawyers in America. They threatened whistleblowers with ruinous lawsuits. They even tried to go over Carreyrou's head directly to the owner of the Wall Street Journal, Rupert Murdoch, who, ironically, was a major investor in Theranos.
They were trying to kill the story by any means necessary. It wasn't just corporate defense. It was an assassination attempt on the truth.
But Murdoch, to his credit, told them to let the reporters do their job. On October 15, 2015, the bombshell dropped. The headline read, "Hot startup Theranos has struggled with its blood test technology." The world was stunned. The Edison was a fraud. The dream was a nightmare. The collapse was swift, but Elizabeth's arrogance remained. Even as the FDA banned her from the lab business, even as the SEC charged her with massive fraud, she continued to pitch new ideas to investors. She truly believed, or perhaps she had lied to herself so deeply, that she could still win. In 2018, Theranos officially dissolved. In 2021, the world watched as Elizabeth Holmes stood in a federal courtroom, not as a billionaire CEO, but as a criminal defendant. She was found guilty on 4 counts of defrauding investors. Her sentence? More than 11 years in federal prison. So, what is the legacy of Elizabeth Holmes? The deepest lie wasn't just the machine. The deepest lie was the system that allowed her to exist. It was a world so desperate for a female hero, so blinded by the promise of easy technology, that it forgot to ask for the data. Elizabeth Holmes is now behind bars, but the fake-it-till-you-make-it culture she weaponized still lingers in the shadows of every boardroom. She didn't just trick the world, she showed us how much we want to be tricked.